All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live AMA with myself. Really happy you're all here. Uh, we had a little technical difficulty, but I think we're off and running now, so appreciate it. I'm using a different camera, so I'll be kind of looking around here. Won't be making direct eye contact with me if that's okay. Um, but all right, I'm gonna get through your questions here, and we'll be off and running. Let me know if you guys have any weird streaming issues or audio issues. I haven't done a lot of it, so low audio. Got it. How's that? Is that any better? Classic low audio issue. How about now? All right. Here we go, folks. Thanks again for joining me on this Tuesday evening. All right. Julie, can you share with us if there is a notable increase in military pilot encounters of UAP in the last year or two? That's a good question. We are still gathering data on that. There has been an increase in reporting to a certain degree. Whether that's been maintained is unknown right now because that reporting is going through the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And I'm eager to hear what their next report is on that topic, because I think that'll be indicative of whether the reporting has increased in the Navy especially, or whether it's kind of plateaued a bit. I would suspect we're not going to be hearing a lot from the Air Force or the other service branches in that next report, although maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. You didn't ask about commercial pilots, but I'll say there does seem to be a noticeable uptick in what commercial pilots are seeing. They have been reporting a lot of time. I've been hearing from these pilots. They say, I've been flying for 20, 30, 40 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I'm starting to see stuff that I don't have an explanation for. And that seems to be a relatively new phenomenon, or at least it seems to be happening more. And I don't know whether that's because there are more incidents, or whether more people are paying attention, or whether more people are comfortable talking about it. So that remains to be seen. Can you confirm that you know more than you're releasing onto? I would like that to be true, I suppose. I'm trying not to lead anyone on, though, to be more precise. There's, of course, some understanding, I think, of the situation that I have, and I'm working to develop this situation as it unfolds. But really, I think this is a conversation that's pretty widespread right now, involves a lot of actors. So as it develops, I think it's going to be anyone's guess. Have I been contacted by any New Zealand or Australian pilots? No, I haven't. I have spoken to some folks within the Australian government, but not specific pilots in those areas. I'd be happy to if they're around, Kiwi, so send them my way. I can confirm, silly goose, that I am not a lizard person. Although, I'll tell you guys, I do enjoy the Y-Files, and I did much enjoy that episode on the Y-Files. Question, are you still involved with To the Stars Academy? What has the company been up to recently? Perhaps it's a misconception, but I was never really involved in any manner with the To the Stars Academy. I did as much as emailing them when they released, or when I found out they were responsible for releasing the gimbal video that was in the 2017 New York Times article. But that was my only real involvement with them at all. I don't really have any other information about what they've been up to. Are there any radar evidence to show the maneuvers of these objects? And if classified, will they ever release them to the public? So yes, there is. That's probably the best source of data that's classified right now, at least from my ecosystem as a fighter pilot. That shows, what the radar shows is the kinematics of the object, so how fast it's going, it's accelerating, what direction it's going, altitude, all these types of things. And yeah, that's going to be classified because typically in fighter jets we're flying around with the best systems, and even if it's a generation old, it's still going to be something that's going to be classified. So in this conversation, there's always going to be better data, and it's probably always going to be classified if it starts within the government. So I think there's really two ways that you can approach this conversation, and this is inherent and baked into everything I do in this environment. It's one, try to engage with stakeholders in the government see what information can be released and disclosed so that we can bring in the wider industry into the conversation. And that's the tact I take as I try to engage with organizations such as the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Senate, or other organizations. How can we engage and be useful with the resources out here in the commercial and civilian world? But also, what resources can we use in the commercial and civil world that are open source, and how can we pursue this topic without involvement from the government? So an open source method versus being able to leverage and help the stakeholders that are already involved in the conversation. I see those two paths as key to being able to move the conversation forward and hedging against either one of those options failing. All right, let's see here. In what ways do safe air and space operations depend on precise understanding of the friendliness of UAPs? Pat asks. So, I think there's a big misconception about why UAP represent a safety issue and a national security issue. When you're flying a fighter jet, one of the things you're always trying to deal with is uncertainty in the environment. What are your tools showing you? What are can you identify who is operating in your area, and what are their intents if they are unknown? So when we have these objects that are unknown in our operating area, to accept that they are okay to be unknown, that inherently is a strategic and tactical risk for how we operate and how we deal with unknowns in our operating environment. And we spend a lot of money to deal with that. So when we do have domain awareness gaps, such as the ability to float slow speed balloons over our airspace, we're going to see our adversaries taking advantage of that. And we saw that just this year with Chinese spy balloons going over the continental United States. And so, it's not necessarily knowing about whether these intend to be friendly or not friendly. That doesn't define whether they are a national security threat or an aviation safety threat. The mere presence alone and our adversaries' willingness to take advantage of our gaps in awareness are what make it a security and an aviation safety risk. All right, let's see here. I'm going to scroll down, make sure you guys don't have any massive complaints about audio or anything right now. All right, looking good. Are you a Top Gun pilot? Jeremy Corbell keeps saying you are. That is, I don't know what Jeremy has been saying, but I did not attend Top Gun, nor did I instruct there. So no, I'm not a Top Gun pilot. All right. Any reported sightings from China Lake? Yes. Are pilots making sightings of things that look different from the standard Starlink cases, orbs going bright and dim? This is a good question. There's been a lot of reports coming from commercial pilots, and they really fall in two categories. The first category is a UAP, a parent UAP that is operating within, it appears, the atmosphere and potentially maneuvering relative to the aircraft in question. So what's that mean? You have a light off your left wing that appears close, and then perhaps it maneuvers underneath the aircraft and onto the right side of the wing. Another category that are being reported are single sources of light that appear at high altitudes. And so not unlike your Starlink, where you have a single source of light, sometimes they get bright, they get dimmer, they can be very bright. You see them appearing in trains. You see them appearing in interesting patterns that are dictated by the crossing of various equatorial and polar and everything in between patterns of these polar or equatorial type orbits. There we go. So there's all sorts of crazy things you can see, but what we're really using to catalog these as UAP and not Starlink is the persistence in the light. And that's really been the big thing. So pilots are seeing a single source of light that are maneuvering in orbital patterns, in racetrack patterns that are dimming out a little bit, but are still visible and getting brighter. And they're doing that in this pattern in a predictable manner. So as it gets to, say, the 8 to 6 o'clock position here, it's most bright and then it dims out, but you can still see it. And then it gets bright and dims out. So you're seeing patterns that are representative of how an aircraft would operate, but potentially hundreds of thousands of feet in low Earth orbit or higher. And that would represent objects going and maneuvering in pretty aggressive manners at essentially in space, which I'm not familiar with, that we have the technology to do so in a regular and repeating fashion such as this. And these lights are visible for sometimes hours on end, not flashing in and out. So really the consistency of the light, the ability for the pilot to track it consistently over a long period of time to ensure that it's not I'm putting bubbles out, to make sure that it's not a collection of satellites that appear to be a singular object in some type of pattern. So that's one of the major clues there. We're also seeing that same behavior, but with other lights trailing behind those objects and maneuvering relatively aggressive as well. So those are again some hints at what pilots are reporting and seeing and using to identify these as unknowns in their book, at least. Of note, at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics UAP Integration and Outreach Committee, which I chair, we're looking in the efforts to collaborate with SpaceX to be able to actually produce some reports and papers on what the actual appearance of Starlink is from various altitudes, aviation-related altitudes. Because if you really look out there, there's not a lot of literature and papers specifically on that topic. And so we want to investigate that so we can weed out some of the chaff here. And also better communicate and educate pilots to those type of new potential spatial illusions so that we can, again, cut out the chaff here. Eloy Salazar asks how taxpayers can push the government for transparency on this subject besides making phone calls to Congress. Well, I'll be a little greedy here and suggest that you go to safeaerospace.org and sign up. And be sure to put your zip code in there if you are a U.S. resident, because we're going to use that information and those numbers to show representatives in Congress that their constituents actually care about this issue. At Americans for Safe Aerospace, one of our major pushes is to ensure that there's a growing and strong caucus of UAP interest within the House and Senate, and to ensure that, the disclosure process, the communication and transparency, the accountability for this topic continues to be something that our representatives are interested in. And so I would encourage you to sign up there, bolster our numbers, and show our representatives that this is something we care about. Thank you, Brave New World. Let's see. Other than the cube spheres you talked about, have you ever seen or experienced any other kind of UFO sighting? If so, when and what did it look like? I have not. I've never had anything that I truly couldn't explain in my own personal experiences outside of flying. So for me, I was somewhat interested in this conversation in the UAP topic when I was a kid. UFOs, just like anyone else, I suppose, but it wasn't something that I had any personal experience with. Your audio is panned hard left. I don't know what that means. Ryan, please take care of your health. You're gaining weight. Well, I'll tell you what, I will take that on board. Thank you. Will you do any presentations or conferences on the West Coast? I will be in Las Vegas on October 22nd at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics Ascend Conference. That's their big space conference. And the UAP Integration Committee will be hosting a UAP sensing working group the evening of the 22nd. We'll be bringing together various organizations and individuals that have been working on the detection and characterization of UAP, and have a working group to discuss people's successes and failures, what's been working, how we can help each other, and really try to bring the community together to have that kind of engineering and technical discussion. So I will be there on October 22nd, which is coming up. And I think that's going to be a really great event that we'd like to host on a regular basis. All right. Are you aware of San Marino's Project Titan to bring the phenomenon to the UN? I am familiar with that effort. I have actually engaged with some of those individuals in that group. For those not familiar, San Marino is a country where they have supposedly, at least from my tertiary understanding, some interesting political mechanisms that allow the people to vote for things they would like their government to do in a very direct manner. And one of the things that the people voted for was for the San Marino government to propose the UN a reoccurring UAP activity at the UN level that would be hosted in San Marino. And I thought that was a fantastic opportunity to be able to have the UN serve as a mediator and center point for different types of reporting mechanisms, both aviation safety as well as potentially for different militaries within the European Union and on the edges of it, to be able to help prevent perhaps misunderstandings with unknown objects operating in contested areas, or to bridge some of the aviation safety frameworks that exist in Europe and Africa and Western Asia. So the idea was that they would be able to really centralize that data collection and standardize it from their vantage point. Now, my understanding is that there has been some political upheaval in San Marino, and what that means is that essentially there's been a coup, more or less. The government is unstable, and they're no longer meeting the obligations of their voters. So the project has been put on hold, as I understand it, for at least a year now. So that's a little update on that front. Adrian asked, do I have faith in Aero and the DoD regarding transparency on UAP? I think I'll answer that question as specifically as I can, which is no, I don't have faith in Aero or the DoD, but faith isn't really something that I would give away on a topic like this. So, Aero does have mandates to be more public in this conversation from Congress, and there is upcoming legislation with the 2023 Disclosure Act that will mandate that information that Aero is receiving will find its way out to the public sphere, assuming it doesn't have grave national security concerns, and that'll be adjudicated by a 9-person panel that'll be appointed by the president and congressionally confirmed. And so I don't have faith in Aero DoD regarding transparency. It's not the Department of Defense's job to be transparent. It's their job to be secretive. That's the world that they operate in. But I think we need to remember that this information itself potentially is not necessarily classified. It's the means and ways in which it was collected. And so if we do have an independent panel that can review that information and make that assessment, that's really one of the best ways forward for transparency. Let's see. Do planes lose power and crash when UFOs are nearby? Not in my experience. Cloud Dragon. Joaquin asks, have you seen any improvements in pilots reporting UAPs? There has been an uptake. There has been an uptake in the Navy. There does not seem to have the same uptake in the Air Force. And in fact, Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida communicated at the hearing in July that Air Force pilots have been discouraged in reporting. So that's not much of an improvement. However, I do understand that the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office has plans to implement more broad reporting, not only within the Navy and other services, aviation services, but within let me say that again. They're looking to implement not just aviation reporting, but service-wide reporting on this issue as well. So that's to be seen, I think, and we'll see how that could potentially grow into what I would like to see is national reporting. All right. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to the channel. Please like this and be sure to subscribe or turn on alarms for future episodes. One of the goals that I'd like to do is really make sure that we can leverage and build out our Patreon so that we can continue to support this channel. It's been incredible how much we've grown the past year. We passed 2 million views about 8 months into this podcast, which is absolutely incredible. And not only was it 2 million views, but because these are sometimes rather long podcasts, I did the math, which worked out to about 76 years of viewing time in 8 months, which I think is a really powerful mechanism for talking about this conversation in a serious, pragmatic way, which we haven't really seen too much of before. So be sure to subscribe for more and be sure to spread the word. Let's see. Will you interview any helo pilots of any sightings they may have encountered? I'd love to, Kim, but I have not heard any stories from helo pilots yet. They do have, I would say, less broad tools that fighters have, so they can't really see as far, and so they would have kind of a limited domain awareness in that regard. But not to say they haven't seen them. I'm sure they have, and I'd love to talk with them. Yeah, we should have some background music or something. That'd be nice. All right. I agree with you, E47. The Air Force does have such a weird stance and behavior on this topic. It's really putting their aircrew in a bad position, it sounds like. If what Mr. Gaetz said at the hearing is true, it sounds like they are literally... they're literally putting their pilots in positions where they can't even report true safety issues, which is, these assets, you got to understand that these assets that we're flying are sometimes national assets. These things can be $100 million. In the Air Force's case, with some bombers, you could be talking about $1 billion, and only a handful of these things might exist. So safety isn't just about ensuring that, we have proper separation between aircraft. It's a strategically important thing to be able to maintain these assets. And so, again, it just goes to show that it's just an irresponsible action to ignore this issue. Dear Ryan, is there any indication that extraterrestrial explanation is more compelling than, let's say, our earthly secret programs? Well, that's a very complicated question. So I think it really boils down to, what were you seeing, the kinematics of it and the behavior, something that we can project forward with the capabilities that we have in any manner? Or do they require some type of fundamental change in understanding or brand new paradigm of capability to be able to take care of or be able to execute on? And, we are seeing things that we would not expect that to be a case. Movements with extremely high accelerations that would likely break not just our bodies, but the electronics in our systems to be able to move that quickly. And even that alone kind of covers both of the bases, because we don't necessarily have the technology to be able to do that. And so that doesn't necessarily lead us to an extraterrestrial explanation. That doesn't mean that because something can outperform us technologically that it must come from some other place in our galaxy, perhaps. But it is indicative that we should pay attention at least so that we can gather enough data to be able to make that conclusion. I tell people all the time that this is such a razor's edge conversation between one side that is, very strong believers in certain things and people that are anti-believers that would not believe anything that's in their face. And it's really, the best way to avoid accidentally falling into either one of those camps is to simply not focus on the conclusion and just look at the data and look at the process and try to improve the data, improve the process so we can build ourselves a way towards a conclusion. All right, let's see here. Let's see. Hi, Ryan. I'm wondering if you think it could possibly, if we could possibly achieve disclosure without government confession, and what you personally think that might take. So I think that's a loaded question, but I think it's important to really think about two terms, and you use one of them. And one of those is disclosure. And that implies that someone knew something for a while and releasing all the information that they know. And I have to make the assumption that's the government. I don't think the government's ever going to, quote unquote, confess everything or disclose everything. It's just, and I don't think we want them to, frankly. I think we do want to have some secrets from our adversaries because, as much as we would like to imagine a world where there isn't violence and or war, we do live in a world where our adversaries would take advantage of such opportunities. And so I don't think we can look to the government making some type of confession or revealing everything there is to be revealed. But I think there is a process that needs to go where there's no longer a fear of being able to talk about this topic itself. And that has, I think, been part of the problem that the government has made worse. I think the other word that you didn't use is discovery. So we have disclosure and discovery. And I think discovery can occur without government confession or even involvement potentially. And that discovery can happen now. It can happen in the open. It can happen with organizations that exist right now, with technology that exists right now. And that's part of the effort that I'm on, open source efforts to be able to better understand this through an effort of discovery. And so I don't know, we can't ever really achieve full disclosure to answer your question. And we certainly can't do it without the government's cooperation, but I think there is a lot of discovery that can be had regardless of whether there's full disclosure or not. Hey, all right, let's see here. Oh, Dell, thank you. Let's see. On September 17th, 2014, a colleague of mine and I witnessed a UFO aerial battle over Trinity site. I have witnessed 40 sightings in the vicinity. Well, that's fascinating, Dell. Thanks for sharing. Love it. All right, let's see here. Who would win a fight, Grush or Elizon? I'd probably have to give it to Lou. That dude is not only jacked, but he's got a low center of mass, I'll say. He's be hard to take down, I think. All right, let's see here. My gosh, so many questions. This is amazing. Cooperman. Awesome. Cuddy the Weeb worked out of VFA 34 Oceania 2018-2022 as an AT. Hello, sir. Fully support the work you do. So cool. Thank you. To see the pilot speaking out and share experience is very cool. Man, I tell you what, you always see one pilot in a jet or a few pilots in a jet, but what they typically don't show in the movies are like the 15 or 20 people that are constantly working on the jets from the moment we get back to the moment we leave. So that's really cool. I'm glad to see folks and support staff and maintenance folks out in Oceania are here supporting this conversation. I'd love to hear if you've heard anything from the air crew you're out there. So make sure you send another message. Let me know. All right, let's see here. Man, I don't have a good question for this, but can you believe how far this has come in such a short time? I honestly no, I don't. It's pretty remarkable if you think back even just 5 years ago. I mean, the world's changed a lot in 5 years, but this conversation has certainly developed in a way that I don't think anyone really imagined it would. We need to get some AWACS operators talking, says Brett Benbow. So AWACS, we call them in the Navy. We have what we call E2Cs and Ds, and those are over-the-horizon radar aircraft, and they act as a command and control type station behind the fighters typically. And I have some good friends that are both pilots and the naval flight officers or NFOs that stay in the back seat and essentially conduct different tactical scenarios back there and monitor the airspace. And they absolutely have been seeing these objects as well. They upgraded their radars too from when they were in the E2C to the E2D. And much like when we upgraded our radars, they were seeing more objects as well with their more powerful radar. So they very much have their own stories to share as well, but it's difficult for people that are still in to engage on this topic. Even just the fear of over speaking on a security issue or something that's classified alone is enough to dissuade someone from speaking out too much. I can only imagine the stress that Mr. Grush must be under with, it sounds like the fine line that he's trying to walk as well. All right, let's see. All right. B. Muirhead. With so many people have taken hardline stances on what the phenomena is, do you think any findings from an honest investigation would be accepted? That's a very good question. I think that any type of conclusion that is drawn will have to be done in a stair-step manner. So I don't think that there's going to be the one paper that comes out and says, here is something from Zeta Reticuli, and here's how we know it, and here's how we know it's technology that evolved from a biological life form on that planet. Right? That would really be, I think, how we would define a capability or technology as being quote-unquote extraterrestrial in a way that we understood to mean something practically other than just not from Earth. And I think the process and to make that true scientific discovery would require a number of papers. If it was totally agnostic, right? If there's no interaction from quote unquote this other thing that's being investigated, then I think it would be a very long process, and that I think the culture and mindset would shift over time so that it would almost seem inevitable by the time it was scientifically mainstream. It would seem obvious by that time, in a sense. That's how I would expect it to be. In a sense, we're undergoing that process now. We have all these, 5 years ago, this was 5 to 8 years ago, this was something that I myself had done it, where I was interviewed about this to the X-Files theme and had to deal with that. But now a great number of our institutions in this government have UAP releases on their official websites. NASA is looking into this. Department of Defense is looking into this. Congress is chomping at the bits to better understand this. So, we might just wake up one day and accept this for reality ourselves. We'll have to see. Comanche Flight. I'm a Marine aircrew veteran, commercial rated pilot, and GS-14 NASA aero engineer. Are you taking applications for pro bono help? Well, I tell you what, a lot of people reach out to me and to various organizations, and I read every single email that comes into any of those organizations. And so if you have something that you'd like to offer, I'm all ears. So feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to see what we can do. hope you guys are having fun. We got 554 people right now. We've had 1,600 views, not bad. Hope I'm answering you guys' questions. Let me scroll down a little bit more. Hi Ryan, this is JSS. I have heard secondary comments referring to your tweet on your disappointment about revealing of bodies in Mexico. Without further scientific evaluation, why initially be disappointed? Well, I chose the words that I used very carefully when I made that tweet, and I was not aware that this was going to happen. I was not told there would be bodies. It was not anything that was communicated with me, and so, I'm not a geneticist. I don't know what those things are, but there's a process that needs to be done with science and evidence and papers and documents. To put it on that stage and to leverage the opportunity to try to make a declarative statement without substantiation it was a stunt. It was disappointing. And it's not the way the conversation needs to move forward to be open and accessible with the general public. Daryl says that Rear Admiral Gallaudet was a great interview, and thanks for putting yourself out there. I appreciate that, and big props to the Admiral there for coming out and being as public and open about this conversation as he has as well. It's incredible when he first reached out to me and we discussed how he was really on the other side of the communication channel when we were seeing these objects out there east of Jacksonville, Florida. It was somewhat reassuring to hear that at least there was an effort to try to identify what these were. From my perspective as an operator, I didn't know any of that was going on, and so at least it makes me feel a little bit better that there was some behind the scenes. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate Tim joining me and having those conversations. I'm looking forward to getting some more folks just like him out there to have those conversations. Christy Hawkins asks, have you heard of aircraft systems like autopilot fail when UAP are close? If so, is it common? It's an interesting question. I am aware of cases where there has been failures of systems in close proximity to, what we would call a UAP. Now, we don't know what those objects are. It's hard to say how close they were. We don't even know if there was a causation there, if it was correlation, but there have been times where autopilot has been kicked off, whether the TCAS system, which is a close proximity alert, has gone off, whether it's the radar altimeter, which is a radar off the bottom of the jet. So there are indications and potential failures, but that's not my personal experience. Thanks, Christy. JSS, thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Chris Schaefer says, to me, it seems like the Congress people in the House that promote the openness of the UAP info now might seem to be fringe in the scope of the body. Yeah, that's a fair concern, I think. I think with today's political environment, you have to be careful about the type of allies you have. But, I've spoken with Congresswoman Luna, Congressman Burchett, and they have been extremely motivated to get to the bottom of this conversation for the right reasons. It has not been a political move out of them. It seems very much that they are doing this for the right reasons. And I was extremely pleased to be able to see the Democrats also on the other side of the aisle joining the conversation. And what was, I think, most appealing for me was that not that I've watched a lot of hearings, but typically there's someone in the hot seat. Either the people that are answering the questions or perhaps someone on the other side of the aisle. But it seemed for one of the rare opportunities that people on both sides of the aisle, as well as the people in the hot seat answering the questions, they all really seem to be actually trying to attack one problem that wasn't each other, which I thought was incredibly motivating to see and something that we rarely have in our politics today. And yeah, some of the people on the right and the left that have been potentially interested in this conversation might have other views that not everyone agree with, but I think this conversation is way too important and it needs to stay very much a bipartisan issue. Hey, Alex, can you speak to what is being done to expand the search to the ocean's lakes, such as submersible Project Galileo sensors and or open source, oh my gosh, I don't know how to pronounce that, bathymetric LiDAR? Thanks for what you do. Thanks, Alex. And thank you so much for that donation as well. That's a really good question. Lakes, I don't know. Tim Gallaudet, in my last episode on the podcast, did a great job of explaining how he believes that there's a lot of opportunity for discovery in this regime underwater. And my understanding is that he wants to actually propose a committee or a group that is going to really take that action to heart and is really going to explore the underwater regime and move this conversation forward in that domain. We don't have that yet. That's not something that exists, but I know that he's really interested in spearheading that. So I think there's going to be more to follow on that side. Thanks again, Alex. All right, let's see. Continuing down. Did any of the reports about gray, black cubes inside clear spheres come with radar and imagery video data? I know folks were seeing those objects on the FLIR system, which is electro-optical and infrared system. For me, I was typically seeing these objects as a single source of IR energy that was relatively nondescript. Although I know folks, including one of my good friends, who was able actually, for whatever reason, break out a cube in a sphere structure on IR, on the FLIR, which was pretty interesting. I did not see that myself, but that's his report from a good friend of mine and colleague on the East Coast. All right. Have you seen? No, I haven't seen that. Have you heard of pilots, civilian and military, they're asked to pursue UAP? Says none your business. Oh, I get it. 15 years ago, I saw a silver metallic sphere outpace a pursuing helicopter in the middle of a city. That'd be a heck of a thing to see. I've heard anecdotally pilots that have responded to UAP. Occasionally, there have been stories where the controlling agency in our working areas would notice something on their radar and would task one of the aircraft to go intercept it to go see what it is. That's kind of how we operate in the Navy. So it's usually pretty close by as well, whereas kind of how I picture intercepts being, actually what I mean is it's usually kind of more of an opportunity thing where we'll reach out to someone doing some training and say, hey, could you check this out for me? Whereas in the Air National Guard and Air Force, they're like, no kidding, on alert, like going to intercept them. They have live ordnance. So they're specifically trained for that activity. And I've asked that question too. How many of those guys of Air National Guard and Air Force have been called to intercept unknown objects over U.S. airspace? And where are those reports? What, for the ones that they were unable to identify but able to actually see an intercept? I think that would be a pretty interesting data set to take a look at. Ryan, did the F-35 pilot go outside of protocol calling 911 after ejecting? No, not necessarily. I think that there'll probably be some lessons learned on how he communicated with them and what he said, perhaps. But that's certainly not outside of our bucket of tools to call 911, especially if there's any type of safety threat, which if you just ejected out of a jet, there typically is. All right, let's see. Got about 15 minutes here, folks. It's been a lot of fun so far. Coffee for your work on disclosure. Thank you, Frosty Llama. Healthy MBS. The Nimitz incident had other assets seeing the objects. Did you have ships, ground, or airborne radar vectoring you to your objects on the East Coast? That's a good question. Our typical day-to-day operations, the only people that were seeing the objects were the jets themselves that had upgraded radars. There are some historical cases about, like I just said, about the controlling agency vectoring one of the training aircraft to go check out a nearby radar contact. But no, we typically don't have what I would call correlation from other radar systems that are different types. When we train off the East Coast like that, we're not usually interfacing with ships, and we're certainly not like debriefing with them or kind of comparing notes afterwards. When we go out for our workup cycle, like we did when we captured the gimbal incident, yes, we are. And in fact, I would not be surprised if there was radar data for the gimbal incident that came from the ship's radar systems and some of the other ships that were in the strike group as well. But that's actually an unexplored avenue as far as I understand right now. Good question, Healthy MBS. Magnamapai, or however it's pronounced. What are your thoughts on reverse engineering? The nested magnetic fields and conditioned vacuum patents submitted by Dr. Pius are interesting as well. Yeah, I mean, Dr. Pius and his patents are quite the rabbit hole. A lot of people have asked me about, and I don't really have the technical capacity to evaluate his scientific claims to a degree to really comment on them. So I'm going to allow the process of science to work on that and see where it ends up. But as far as reverse engineering, I think that kind of goes back to the disclosure versus discovery conversation, which as far as the disclosure conversation goes, it's not necessarily my wheelhouse because I haven't worked on any type of, potential UAP, SAPs or anything like that. I'm not an insider on that regard. So my thoughts on reverse engineering and the efforts that we may or may not be doing are totally just open source knowledge like anyone else. Sorry I couldn't be more helpful on that, Magnum. All right, continuing down. Forget about air safety. If UAP are real, it's ground safety that's also impacted. Well, no doubt, but one problem at a time. Why is one of the 5 observables instantaneous acceleration but not velocity? Because instantaneous acceleration does not mean high g-forces. Well, I think the technical answer for that question is because velocity is relative, and so I mean everything is moving at various relative velocities to each other, and so it'd be very hard to assess that as an observable that is spectacular. It would really depend on your frame of reference, and that could change. Hey, Brave New World, thank you. Ryan, do any of the pilots who witnessed the black cube in a translucent sphere plan to come forward? Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, well, nug down this for a second. When I first started this podcast, I asked the weapons system officer that recorded the gimbal video if he would join the podcast and be on one of our kind of first tapings. And it was a low pressure ask because I knew he was still active duty. I didn't consider myself, and I still don't, a media source, so I don't think there's really technically a problem doing it, but I could understand how it could piss off his chain of command and potentially get in trouble. So, there was no pressure here, but he was engaged and interested, but ultimately decided the timing wasn't correct to do so. With that being said, it's only a matter of time until he gets out, which could be relatively soon. And if that's the case, I have no doubt that we'll have a great conversation when that day comes. So I'm looking forward to it. We're still friends. He's taken a jet up to my house, or at least to an airport nearby not too long ago to say hi to me and my family. Hey, Sen. On Yes Theory's episode with David Grush, he said, by February 2024, we should have a presidential panel on UAP disclosure looking at the crash retrieval issue. Aware of anything that substantiate this? I believe the presidential panel that he's referencing is the panel of 9 that would be presidentially appointed, congressionally confirmed as part of the Disclosure Act. So I believe that's what he's referring to. Yeah. Hope to answer your question. If you can say, without divulging classified information, were there any malfunctions to equipment that would be caused by minute time anomalies? 100%, yeah. Really, most, if not all, navigation systems, crypto systems, and some other systems, I'm sure, are heavily timing dependent, and so many of those systems would have issues if there were. Now, minute, or does that mean minute time anomalies? I don't know, but either way, yeah, I'm sure there's some threshold there, but I don't know what it is. Good question. About 10 more minutes, folks. I hope you guys like this. Let me know in the chat if this is of value to you guys. It seems like it is. I'm happy to do this more often, or on a regular basis, so we can do this. So you guys just let me know what you think, and we can go from there. Jennifer asks, what are your thoughts on Bob Lazar's claims? Well, as I told Mr. Rogan on his show, I would like to believe Bob Lazar and his story. I don't know. I don't have any information or evidence that would allow me to believe him, frankly. So, I'm happy if he has anything that I could do to help him validate his story, whether that's some type of material analysis or other data that we could use to follow up on. But otherwise, it's a nice to believe story that, I think is interesting, but I don't really have any hard data on it. Please no Bob, says Eric. All right, let's see here. What roles, if any, does AI help in data catalog and analysis? This is an avenue of something maybe valuable. Yeah, absolutely, Miss ChatGPT 4. Are you real? I don't even know. So I think there's a lot of normal data analysis that can be done, and sifting through a large amount of data that could be inherent with passive collection systems. A lot of data can come in, and can we find signals in that noise? That's one thing, but there's a kind of an opposite to that, which is, how do you detect anomalies? How do you train machine learning models to actually detect something that you don't know what it looks like? You're just looking for an outlier case. And that's a much more challenging issue. And that's something that some of our science labs, and there's a lot of research on anomaly detection, not in the unidentified anomaly, but just anomaly. And so, yeah, there's really two categories of how machine learning, I think, can help with just the data problem itself. I also think machine learning could potentially do a lot on the kind of space sensing side, being able to have edge machine learning capabilities and chips, which will filter and parse a lot of the data on space sensor systems, will allow it to be able to send back really the data that's only important. And that's what I think would be really valuable to make these type of efforts more economically viable, which is what we need to be able to get this in more hands and get more minds looking at this. Lindsay, can you share any theories you've come across regarding the operators of these crafts and their connection to humanity? Well, gosh, I've heard a lot of theories, and I'm tracking a lot of them. I've heard of Hal Puthoff, so I've read his paper on crypto-terrestrials, and of course there's extraterrestrials, and there's the theory that these could have been something that lived on Earth a long time ago and went somewhere else. There's a lot of very interesting potential connections to humanity or theories that exist about these operators. I know you guys don't like hearing that we don't have enough data to make those conclusions, but I think that's still where we're at. Yeah, I think that's where we're still at, but I think we're going to figure it out. I think we have the tools. I think that's what's unique about what we're doing now. Triple G, USN sub veteran. Are there any reports coming from our subs? The link between nuke power weapons is intriguing to me. Curious to know if there's a link to radioactive waste facilities transports too. Another good question. There are reports. I'm working at least one case at Americans for Safe Aerospace. We handle two different types of cases there, kind of commercial reports, visual sightings that are more data collection and agglomeration, and then we work specific cases, which are more data-driven, more rich. And one of those cases is an underwater case, and we have the ability to take those cases and walk them into various stakeholders in government and elsewhere that have a vested interest in investigating some of these cases and looking into them. So there has been some reports of cases underwater, objects that are traveling at much higher speeds than you expect underwater, that are steering and maneuvering in a way that they appear to be tracking submarines at very, very deep depths, so much so potentially hurting the submarines. These are even, I think, in a way more challenging than the reports that we have in the air. It's harder to sense underwater. Of course, the visual acuity is down. There's just a lot of limitations that are different. And in that world, it's a bit more opaque, both security-wise and literally. So it's hard to break into. But there are some interesting cases that exist right now, and I think we're going to be hearing more about them soon. Thank you, Dored Max. Appreciate you and your kind words. Thank you. I know we only got a couple minutes here. I'm gonna keep going a last minute here if I can. Is it safe to assume that all UAP sightings and cases should follow 5 characteristics? That's a good question. I don't know. I like the idea of the 5 observables, but it seems to be perhaps too simplistic to truly capture the scope of the issues we're seeing. So that I haven't necessarily done enough firsthand research to make that assessment, but I would be cautious to throw anything away that doesn't fit that model. I am aware of Haim Rashid's claims. It's a big claim. I don't know anything more about it than I think all you folks do, but at a certain point we got to wonder if these people in very high positions are not quite as stable as we thought, or if they were exposed to information that makes them appear to be less stable than we thought. I don't have an answer for that. Do you ever have to play an eyewitness from your squad? Yes. All right, folks. Well, I think we're going to call it there. I think this was a success. I think we'll call it that. I'm pretty sure that you guys want to do this again based off of the success we saw here today. Almost 2,500 views, 620 concurrent viewers. So pretty awesome, guys and gals. I'm really happy that you guys were here. You showed up. Thanks for asking really good questions, and thanks for being thoughtful, engaged citizens on this conversation. Appreciate y'all. Good night.